Today on NewsWatch, the Obama administration works to win congressional approval on the nuclear deal with Iran, why some lawmakers say secret side deals might derail that from happening. Plus,
ridiculous. We trust them with weapons of mass destruction to go defend our country, but when they come home and they can't even have a sidearm, that makes absolutely no sense.
protecting our troops, Americans aren't just calling for change at military recruitment centers across the U.S. after the deadly shooting last week. They're also taking action. And in family entertainment news, the true story behind the famous song Amazing Grace and why it's now on Broadway. Thanks so much for joining us here for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. The Obama administration's big push to win congressional approval for the nuclear deal with Iran is underway. The president's team has promised full disclosure, but some lawmakers have already uncovered secret side deals that could force the deal to lose congressional support. Gary Lane is on this story.
After Defense Secretary Ash Carter tried to change the Israeli Prime Minister's mind about the Iranian nuclear deal, John Kerry lobbied members of Congress on Capitol Hill. The U.S. Secretary of State promised full disclosure of the Iranian nuclear agreement.
We're very much looking forward to answering any and every question that the members of the House have, and then later the members of the Senate.
But despite the administration's pledge of transparency, two congressmen revealed they recently learned about two secret side deals that were made between the UN International Atomic Energy Agency and Iran. Congressman Mike Pompeo and Senator Tom Cotton announced details in a press release. They said the secret deals will not be shared with other countries, Congress, or the public. They apparently involve IAEA inspection of an Iranian military base where nuclear warhead development is proceeding, and PMDs, possible military dimensions of the Iranian nuclear program. The Cotton-Pompeo disclosure forced National Security Advisor Susan Rice to acknowledge side deals were made, involving some sticking points in the negotiations with Iran. The White House will not make details public, but promises to reveal information about the secret deals in a classified briefing with some members of Congress. Congressman Pompeo, a member of the House Intelligence Committee, says the Obama administration agreed to the secret side agreements, and he says without disclosing them, the president is asking the American people to trust but not verify. The intent of that remark was likely to compare President Obama's negotiating skills with those of Ronald Reagan. In December 1987, at the signing of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces deal with the Soviets, President Reagan reminded Mikhail Gorbachev of an old Russian proverb.
Doverye no proverye. Trust but verify.
Republicans admired Reagan for standing up to the Soviets and gaining concessions. 28 years later, they're saying secret side deals could make it unlikely to verify that Iran really is complying with this nuclear deal. Meanwhile, House Speaker John Boehner says he'll do everything he can to stop the nuclear deal. Congress will have 60 days to consider and debate the agreement before a vote in September. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Most Americans who are familiar with the Iran nuclear deal are against it. 48% disapprove of it, while 38% approve, according to a new poll from the Pew Research Center. The poll comes as Defense Secretary Ashton Carter visited Israel to talk with Israeli leaders about the agreement with Iran. As Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem, Israel continues to warn it's a danger, and not just to Israel.
After Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter, he still called it a bad deal.
Yet today we are told that the whole world supports this bad deal. Well, that's just not true. Israel and many Arab states oppose this deal. And in any case, sometimes the entire world can be wrong.
As the debate over the agreement shifts to Capitol Hill, Israeli officials are calling attention to the danger that Iran poses not just to Israel, but to the United States.
When we're speaking about Iran, we are dealing with a country whose leadership calls for death to America. It's not as though that Israel is taking action because it alone is in the crosshairs of the Iranians or of the Iranian military. The United States is in the crosshairs of the Iranian military.
Director General of Israel's Foreign Ministry, Dori Gold, told reporters Iran not only shouts death to America, but also operates inside the United States.
America is targeted by Iran. Hezbollah today, which is, let's be clear about it, Hezbollah is an extension of the Iranian security apparatus. It has networks in Europe and in the United States. And we say that both the Revolutionary Guards and Hezbollah are operating in 30 countries, according to our best information.
Despite the worldwide influence of Hezbollah and Iran's Revolutionary Guard, the agreement gives a long list, 70 pages worth of Iranian companies, entities, and individuals freedom from sanctions. That will represent a windfall for Iran's economy. And critics warn that Iran can use some of that money to fund terrorist activities around the world. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Iran's deputy foreign minister is confirming for the first time that the Americans being held captive by Tehran were discussed during the nuclear negotiations. But U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has said the American captives were not made part of the deal for fear of derailing it. 4 Americans are imprisoned in Iran: Christian pastor Saeed Abedini, former U.S. Marine Amir Hekmati, Washington Post reporter Jason Rezan, and retired FBI agent Robert Levinson. CBN News is staying on top of the latest developments with the Iran nuclear deal. To see our complete coverage, simply log on to cbnnews.com. ISIS is a bigger threat to American security than al-Qaeda. That is the latest word from the head of the FBI. In an address to the Aspen Security Forum, James Comey said the Islamic State's efforts to inspire troubled Americans to kill at home has more of a terror threat. Comey also noted the group has seen success in recent months after a year-long social media push to radicalize young Americans and young Europeans. The president of Nigeria says a multinational Africa force will be in place within 10 days to take on the radical Islamic group Boko Haram. The group has killed thousands and was behind the abduction of hundreds of schoolgirls last year. President Mahmoud Buhari told the Associated Press Boko Haram would be defeated in a year or a year and a half, possibly less. But he admits Nigerian authorities don't have intelligence about the girls kidnapped last April. That kidnapping spurred international outrage and a campaign to, quote, bring back our girls. And an effort to defund the nation's largest abortion provider is gaining traction in Congress. Republican Congresswoman Diane Black from Tennessee has introduced a bill to defund Planned Parenthood. And at least 50 other GOP senators are calling on the Obama administration to investigate the federally funded organization. 2 recently released undercover videos show 2 different Planned Parenthood directors discussing the sale of baby body parts. U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch says the Department of Justice will review the videos and determine what steps need to be taken. Meanwhile, some Democrats are asking the Department of Justice to investigate if any laws were violated in the recording of those undercover videos. The number of teenage girls using the morning after pill has spiked. More than 1 in 5 sexually active girls report using the emergency contraceptive. That's a dramatic increase from a decade earlier, when 1 in 12 used the pill. A new report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention shows that easy access and relaxed age restrictions help to increase that usage. Teens can now buy the drug without a prescription. The suspected shooter in the Charleston church massacre has now been indicted on dozens of federal charges. The move comes 5 weeks after 9 black churchgoers were murdered at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church. The charges against Dylan Roof include hate crimes, firearms violations, and obstructing the practice of religion. Before the attack, Roof appeared in photos waving Confederate flags and burning or desecrating the U.S. flag. Federal authorities on Wednesday confirmed he had also written a manuscript opposing integration and using racial slurs against blacks. And he reportedly wrote online of fomenting racial violence.
To carry out these twin goals of fanning racial flames and exacting revenge, Roof further decided to seek out and murder African Americans because of their race. Mother Emanuel was his destination, specifically because it was an historically African American church of significance to the people of Charleston, of South Carolina, and to the nation.
The Justice Department has not decided whether it will seek the death penalty against Roof. Still to come, a call to protect military recruitment centers. Hear the changes one lawmaker is calling for after the deadly shootings in Tennessee. Today, we're learning new details about the Tennessee shooting that took the lives of 5 U.S. service members last week. A report released Wednesday says it took Mohammed Yusuf Abdulaziz 3 to 5 minutes to walk through a gate with his rented car and to shoot his way into the Navy Marine Reserve Center. A service member inside the building saw the 24-year-old shooter approaching and fired at him with his personal weapon. At the same time, Marines were running from room to room trying to get their fellow service members to safety. The incident sent shockwaves of outrage across the country, many asking why service members are prohibited from carrying firearms at military recruitment centers. Now, private citizens across the country are taking up the task of guarding military recruiting centers.
This is ridiculous. We trust them with weapons of mass destruction to go defend our country, but when they come home, they can't even have a sidearm? That makes absolutely no sense.
Now is Virginia State Senator Dick Black, who is calling on Virginia's governor to arm the military in the wake of the Chattanooga shooting. Senator Black, thank you so much for being here.
I'm very pleased to be with you.
A question many Americans are asking: why aren't soldiers who are working at recruitment centers allowed to be armed?
You know, it's an amazing thing. This goes back to the days of Bill Clinton, when you recall he came into office. And the Clintons had a reputation for having a loathing of the military. He issued very strict orders that said there would be no loaded firearms on our military installations. And as a consequence, the armed forces have now turned into the disarmed forces.
So why are you calling for the National Guard to step in and protect our service members?
Well, what's happening now is, you know, the war on terror, while the federal government seems to have lost its focus, it is a very real thing. We are under incessant attack. Of course, it started 9/11 with 3,000 Americans being killed by Al-Qaeda. Now we have this terrible incident in Chattanooga where we had attacks on 2 installations, one on the Marine Recruiting Center, and then one on another installation. We had 4 Marines killed. We had a sailor killed, and unfortunately, on the Marine Recruiting Center, there is a prominent decal that says "No guns allowed." There are bullet holes all through the windows, so obviously the decal did not deter the jihadists who decided to attack the Marines.
We've seen action in at least a half dozen states. Why hasn't the governor of Virginia taken action yet, you think?
You know, I wrote to the governor day before yesterday, and I also spoke with the chief of staff to the governor, and I urged him. I said, look, there is no excuse for telling our troops that if you're attacked by an enemy, you're to run and hide. That's not what Americans do. But Governor McAuliffe is very close to the Clintons. The Clintons are very intensely anti-gun and anti-military. They have a long history of this. And so he is trying to pave the way in Virginia for Hillary Clinton's ascendancy to the presidency. He's not going to do anything that's going to be out of alignment with her policies.
Mm-hmm. Senator Black, we're seeing more civilians taking on the role of protecting our service members. Do you think that's a good idea?
You know, I'm all in favor of it, but it's somewhat like hiring people to protect our police from criminals. We have police whose purpose is to protect us from criminals. We have military people whose purpose is to protect us and our nation from terrorists like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who are increasingly targeting people. You know, I have personally been targeted by ISIS. They came out in their worldwide propaganda magazine and they singled out 3 American figures as enemies of ISIS. One was Rick Santorum, who's a presidential candidate. One was the head of the CIA mission in Afghanistan. And the third was me. And part of it is because I have talked at length about what I believe is their strategy in the Middle East, of toppling Syria in order to establish an Islamic caliphate. And so we've actually got Americans in this country being targeted. They published a list of 30 military families with their names, their addresses, their family members, and they're really calling on people who follow the most radical strand of Islam to go out and to kill. And I think we've got to become a harder people. We've got to return to, get away from the days of Barney Frank and move to the days of John Wayne, where Americans didn't run and hide. Americans stood and fought to the death.
We've got less than 20 seconds, but real quick, what are your colleagues saying?
I think most people, both my colleagues and the people at large, think that it makes good sense to have soldiers armed.
All right.
Honestly, people are absolutely dismayed to discover that we have people in our armed forces who are prohibited from carrying arms.
All right, Senator Black, thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated.
It's great to be with you.
Amazing Grace, a new play tells the story behind the famous song. We'll take you to New York and show you what it's all about. Well, it is one of the best-known songs of all time, but many people don't know the true tale behind Amazing Grace. Well, now that inspiring story has been turned into a musical. Angela Zatopek takes us behind the scenes for this look at the new play from New York City.
It's a song that's been heard in churches, schools, and yes, even presidential speeches.
Amazing Grace.
Well, now it's hitting a different kind of stage right here in New York City. Amazing Grace is on Broadway.
Why can't you see?
Lighting up the stage with Tony Award-winning actors, Amazing Grace tells the story behind the famous hymn and its author.
It's the story of John Newton, who was a horrific slave trader, who through his faith became the man who wrote the hymn and started the abolitionist movement in England.
One day wandered into a library and pulled a book off the shelf at random that said John Newton. I had no idea who he was. So I sat and I read this book cold, and this amazing story opened up.
Newton, the slave trader, became a slave himself when his crew betrayed him in West Africa. Serving an African duchess, he endured the same type of abuse he once handed out.
Let the wind and the waves wash away the fool I used to be.
Rescued years later, Newton converted to Christianity and eventually became a prominent voice in the abolitionist movement.
I thought the world needs to know about John Newton. I was embarrassed. I didn't know anything about him when I started this project. And now, of course, I feel like the world needs to know John Newton.
Despite its graphic depiction of the slave trade, composer Christopher Smith says it's for all audiences.
Nobody in this industry originally believed that there was any audience for this. The desire to be loved in spite of your faults is not a religious impulse or a secular impulse. It's a human impulse.
We'll make a song.
Immensely relevant and resonant story for our time right now, and hopeful about second chances and about making a change and about starting with yourself to make a bigger change.
Producers guarantee that audiences will leave inspired by its musical score. This song is unique in so many ways. It's crossed gender and generational boundaries for ages, as it seems to unite people at every turn. It also seems to give people a sense of hope, which is something our country desperately needs right now. I'm Angela Zatopek, CBN News, New York City.
Your $10 bill is getting a facelift, literally. Earlier this year, President Obama announced plans to put a woman on the bill, and it's causing some controversy. A nonprofit called Women on 20 says the $10 bill is not enough. It wants a woman on the $20 bill instead. The group's online campaign has more than 500,000 signatures. The Treasury Secretary is open to suggestions about who should be on the currency, but he is sticking to the $10 bill. Now, the debate has put a group called MRC TV on a quest to see how many Americans actually know who's on their money. What they found out is quite funny.
You guys have spent $10 bills.
Is that his name?
No, that's actually the Secretary of the Treasury. This guy's dead.
I know he's the president. Names don't come to me. Is that Thomas Jefferson?
No. Van Buren. That's an interesting guess, but wrong. Alexander Hamilton.
Well, you can see that entire video at cbnnews.com. Quite interesting indeed. Well, finally this hour, we leave you with a note of thanks here on what we like to call Thankful Thursday. Have you ever fallen on your knees to pray, simply frustrated that you don't understand something or you simply don't understand some people? As I prepared to do that last night and even this morning, I thought, God, I am so thankful you don't call me to understand everything. You simply call me to trust you in all things. As we know, He causes all things to work together for our good. We don't always need to know exactly how He's going to do that. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. We'd love to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you join us again right here next time. Make this a thankful Thursday.